the time the police cruiser rolled to the curb, the birthday party had gone completely silent. Children stood motionless around the cake table. Parents stared across the yard, and Brenda Kensington, the HOA president who had turned a child's celebration into a crisis, suddenly looked far less certain than she had minutes earlier. She had arrived convinced she could control the day, armed with a clipboard, a phone, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged. Now every eye in Cedar Ridge Estates was on her, and the weight of what she had done was finally catching up. The strange part was that the whole disaster began with a backyard party that had followed the rules better than most events in the neighborhood. Arthur Mitchell had planned Leo's 10th birthday with the kind of care that only comes from wanting one peaceful day with no conflict. Cedar Ridge Estates was tidy, quiet, and filled with homeowners who knew exactly which plants were allowed, which fences needed staining, and how fast an overlooked decoration could become a complaint. Arthur had filed the notice 3 weeks in advance, attached the layout, and saved the approval in case the board later pretended to not remember signing it. The party itself was gentle and cheerful. A bounce house tucked out of street view, paper stars strung beneath the pergola, a rocket-themed cake, a few parents, and children who only wanted sunshine and games. Megan had spent the morning adding the final touches, her dark pink cardigan bright against the green lawn, while Leo, all sandy blonde hair and excitement, kept checking the cake as if it might launch into space. The only real problem in the neighborhood was Brenda. Her reputation had been built over years of nitpicking, selective enforcement, and a talent for turning ordinary life into a violation. Brenda arrived at midday as if she had been summoned by the smell of happiness. Her curly golden blonde hair was pulled into a neat low ponytail. Her dark pink blazer looked pressed to the millimeter, and her clipboard never left her hand. She crossed the yard with a rigid, measured step and immediately broke the mood. Children who had been laughing a moment earlier went quiet. Parents exchanged uneasy looks. Brenda studied the decorations, the bounce house, the table, and the balloons with the expression of someone convinced she had uncovered misconduct rather than a birthday. Arthur stayed composed and pointed to the approved paperwork, but Brenda ignored the context and latched onto tiny details as if they were proof of wrongdoing. She began documenting the scene from the middle of the yard, then drifted toward the property line to inspect it again from another angle. What should have been a sunny family gathering was being reshaped into an unofficial hearing, and Brenda looked fully prepared to drag it out until everyone else was exhausted. The longer Brenda stayed, the more the pressure spread through the party. She took photos from the fence, then checked her phone, then circled back with the same dissatisfied look, as though repetition itself could turn harmless decorations into evidence. The children felt the shift first. Their voices dropped, their games slowed. Even the adults who had come to help with the celebration began standing closer together, aware that the situation had become awkward in a way that could turn expensive. Brenda seemed especially irritated by the bounce house and the streamers, as if fun itself was a zoning issue. Every few minutes she found a new problem to notice, each one smaller and more absurd than the last. Arthur kept the party moving, serving drinks, checking on the kids, and refusing to let Brenda drag him into a fight. But her behavior had changed from annoying to predatory. She was no longer just complaining, she was building a case in her head, and her glances toward the street suggested she had already decided to involve someone beyond the HOA board.
The final line was crossed when Brenda reached for the emergency system. At that point, she was no longer reacting to anything real. She was reacting to the fact that the party had not bent to her will. Arthur could feel the atmosphere tighten the moment she turned away and made the call. The children did not understand all of it, but they understood enough to stop laughing. The adults sensed the danger of the moment, not because anyone had done anything wrong, but because Brenda had decided to exaggerate a neighborhood dispute into an urgent crisis. Arthur kept everyone calm and kept Leo away from the curb, but the sound of approaching sirens changed the entire day in an instant. What had been a birthday party now carried the tension of an unfolding investigation. Brenda's confidence returned in flashes as she waited for validation, yet there was a crack in it now, small but visible. For the first time, she had reached too far, and there was no guarantee the result would favor her. When the officers arrived, the truth became impossible to hide. They looked over the yard, the children, the cake, the bounce house, and the paperwork Arthur had kept ready from the beginning. The scene was orderly, peaceful, and fully consistent with the approval the HOA had already granted. Brenda's version of events began collapsing almost immediately under the simplest scrutiny. The officers did not see an emergency. They saw a child's birthday party and a board president who had turned personal irritation into a misuse of emergency services. The family's careful preparation, once treated like a provocation, suddenly read as proof of how unfair Brenda had been. Neighbors who had been quietly watching now understood why so many complaints about her had never gone anywhere. Brenda's face shifted through indignation, disbelief, and then a kind of stunned panic as her authority evaporated in public view. The power dynamic flipped so hard that even the children sensed it. She was no longer the one in charge of the moment. She was the one being questioned by it. The fallout moved through Cedar Ridge Estates faster than any HOA notice ever could. By the next day, the board had suspended Brenda and opened an emergency review of her conduct, her complaints, and the complaints that had piled up against her for years. The neighborhood also changed in a more lasting way. Residents who had been silent started speaking up. Rules that had been enforced like personal opinions were rewritten with clearer standards and a stronger appeals process. People who had spent years worrying about small mistakes felt the tension lift from the community almost overnight. Arthur's family finally enjoyed the birthday they had worked so hard to create, and Leo remembered the day not as the day a party was ruined, but as the day everyone saw what fairness actually looked like when the pressure was on. Brenda's reputation never recovered, and the story of her overreach became the cautionary tale parents used whenever the HOA threatened to get too big for its own rules. In the end, Cedar Ridge Estates learned something valuable. A neighborhood built on fear is not stable, and the moment people stop being afraid, the whole balance changes. If you were living there, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have finally spoken up?